Oh, yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your hosts, Mr. Jordan Plocker. With me, as always, is the beautiful Mr. Josh Liskowitz. How are you, sir?
I am doing very well. How are you, Mr. Plocker?
I am excellent, buddy. We are at like the halfway point now, and so we have these cool lists that we keep doing over here at ProFootballFocus.com, and we have one right now, courtesy of our Nathan Yonke, the 140-pound Nathan Yonke. He wrote the 2017 midseason PFF NFL All-Rookie Team. And Josh, nobody likes talking about the rookies more than you and I. I'm excited about this. Let's get it. Let's talk about these rookies. We got right off the bat, Deshaun Watson is the quarterback, and ACLs, Josh. I still have to create my Spider Silk ACLs. We keep getting undermined by these ACLs. But Watson was a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, he was a blast to watch. Obviously we've talked about him quite a bit because we've talked about rookies every week, but that was such a great situation for him to go into because we talked about how they had so many other pieces in place. That was a place where he could go learn the game, wouldn't be asked to do too much, and they could kind of work on him being a little more conservative, not making all the mistakes. Well, he really went above and beyond that. Far surpassed kind of what we expected in terms of that team really became his very, very quickly. And obviously they had some injury issues on the other side of the ball that may have precipitated that. But, man, he was spectacular as a rookie. So I'm excited to see him back on the field next year. I'm excited to see what opposing teams do to try and combat him because now there's film on him. So teams are going to have a better game plan for him. So let's see how he adjusts next year. And I know it's not much consolation right now for Texans fans, but throughout this, it's going to be a painful last half of the year, but you're going to get a better draft pick. Obviously not a first-round one. You've given that up for him, but clearly I think at this point it's pretty obvious it was worth it for them to do that, and you have to feel good about that.
Oh, yeah. All right, moving on to the next position here. Running back, we have Kareem Hunt. No shocker to us or to you, Josh. I said you predicted this. He's still killing it, Josh. He's not on the same tear that he was to begin the season, but man, is he still really productive.
Yeah, I think matchup-wise has been kind of an issue the last 3-4 games, as has the offensive line. They've had significant injury issues on the offensive line. But I'm not looking at their schedule. I think they're going to get some more favorable matchups anyway going forward, and I think you're going to see him pick it back up a bit down the stretch. And this bye week's coming at a good time, though. I think that team played a little tired last week in Dallas, and certainly when you have a rookie that's carrying a load like he is, that's part of it. So get fresh in that bye and come back, and I think we're going to see September Kareem Hunt again.
All right, we have a flex offensive player on this list, and that sort of works well for who it is, and that's running back Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. Josh, he's getting a lot of work done in the pass game. He's almost getting more work done there than he is as a running back.
Yeah, and considering they just traded away Kelvin Benjamin, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of him in a wider variety of roles. Obviously, there's going to be an increased amount of volume and production in a number of places, but I think they're going to continue to rely heavily on Christian McCaffrey. We're probably going to see even a little bit more of him in the run game as well, but certainly the passing game, I think it's kind of his show right now already in Carolina.
All right, moving on to the offensive line at left tackle, we have Garrett Bowles, 95.1 pass blocking efficiency.
Yeah, that's in his last 4 games, which is an improvement. He was at 92.7 the first 4, so he's already shown an improvement there. And obviously that was the single biggest issue last year for Denver. So while they're in a very rough patch right now, and that was an ugly all-around performance this past week for them, they should be happy with the production they've gotten from their rookie left tackle so far. And that's not really where the bulk of their issues have come from this year.
All right, quickly moving on in the interior O-line here. We have the left guard. We have Dan Feeney of the Los Angeles Chargers holding it down there, the PFF grade of 79.5. At center, we have Pat Elflein of the Minnesota Vikings. At right guard, we have Jermaine Illuminor of the Baltimore Ravens. And then, Josh, at right tackle, we have a PFF favorite there, Ryan Ramczyk for the Saints.
Yep, that was a guy that we probably, had he been healthy, I think he probably would have been a top 15, certainly a top 20 pick. Probably would have been taken ahead of Garrett Bowles, who we did like as well. But Ramczyk was really our top tackle, and that's the way he's played so far. He's been excellent. He hasn't missed a snap yet. Played some both right and left tackle. His 96.7 pass blocking efficiency, that's tied for 10th among all offensive tackles.
Wow, that's
so
impressive.
He's just. We're just getting started with that Saints draft class on this list.
All right, now we are going to move on to the defensive side of this midseason all-rookie team, and we're going to start in the middle, Josh, with some big space eaters. I got Dalvin Tomlinson from the New York Giants, a PFF grade of 83.7. Man, he's getting it done as a run stopper.
Yeah, he really is, and we're going to talk to a little bit later with Ryan Smith. One of our guys at PFF about the Giants and about Dalvin Tomlinson a little bit and how good he's been. But, I don't think that's a real big surprise either. We knew he was a guy coming from Alabama, would be ready to come in and contribute right away. 13 run stops, that leads all rookie defensive tackles. So he's been excellent for them, as we expected.
Speaking of Alabama, the other big space eater in there is Jonathan Allen from the Washington Redskins. 81.3 is a PFF grade there. He's a little bit more versatile, I think, than Tomlinson and what he can offer. But still, that's really impressive to have both of those interior guys from Alabama are top on our midseason list.
Yeah, it is. And again, not a huge surprise because they're both so highly touted. Unfortunately, Jonathan Allen is probably done for the year, so we're probably not going to see him again. But pass rush productivity, second best for all 34 defensive ends in the league this year so far. Now, obviously, he only had 5 games. He's not going to have more, but still, very impressive debut for him. And Washington, that run defense is going to suffer without him. There's no question about that.
All right, on the edge, we have 2 players. The first one would be the Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns, who was the number 1 overall pick, so that's not really a shocker that he has made this list. The other one is pretty impressive. That's Carl Lawson, the edge from the Cincinnati Bengals, with a PFF grade of 82.3. He was one of our faves, Josh, and he is not disappointing.
No, we talked about all offseason how Bengals had this great draft, but they have to be willing to use these rookies. And while that hasn't been the case with all of them, that certainly has been the case with Carl Lawson. They've been going to him, and he has he have 35 total pressures this year, tied for 5th most among all 43 defensive ends. He's been outstanding for them. It just brings a dimension that they've really been lacking the last couple of years. They've really struggled to get consistent edge pressure, and Lawson has brought it for him. Yeah,
his pass rushing productivity of 15.1 is 3rd best behind only Von Miller and Cameron Wake.
That's pretty elite company.
Wow. Yeah, so that's awesome. Good job, Carl. You're making us look good. All right, so moving on to the linebackers, Josh, we have Zach Cunningham from the Houston Texans. Again, we are not shocked. And we have Reuben Foster from the San Francisco 49ers. Again, not shocked. Both those guys have PFF grades in the 80s, and both are athletic and versatile. So, again, both are getting it done.
Yeah, one thing I want to highlight was Zach Cunningham, especially considering where he went, because he went kind of in the middle of round 2. You had Jared Davis went first round to Detroit, who's been okay for them, but he's had significant struggles in coverage. Not for Zach Cunningham. Zach Cunningham is averaging 0.63 yards per coverage snap. That's the 2nd lowest among all inside linebackers. He's just really rounded out that group of linebackers for them, really been a strong player for them as a rookie, and I just think he's going to continue to get better. Foster's been in and out with injuries, but when he's in, he's made a huge impact. He has 16 tackles. That's the most for all inside linebackers who have not missed a tackle this season. So he's been very reliable when he has been healthy and on the field. He really is able to do just a little bit of everything for that defense in San Francisco that is still trying to rebuild, but he is certainly one of the main pieces going forward for them.
All right, Nathan was kind enough to also put a flex defensive player on this list, which makes sense, because there's so many times where you have to take a linebacker off and bring in another defensive back. And so his flex on this list is Desmond King from the Los Angeles Chargers, a PFF grade of 84.0. And again, a guy that we've highlighted on the show many times. Josh, we like him. We think he's just a playmaker in and out. So what are you seeing from him?
Yeah, I love the stat that Nathan put on his article. He's one of 6 corners this year with 170 or more cover snaps from the slot that is not allowed a touchdown in the slot. Wow. So that's outstanding production from him. He's one of those guys that graded really well for us for 2 years. Also, he had some return ability. He showed that at Iowa. And then he went to the Senior Bowl, and they asked you to do a little bit of everything there. And he really struggled in man coverage there. And that kind of started a bit of a fall for him. But it's one of those situations where, look, we have a lot of really good film on him. So there's a specific way to play him. You put him more in a zone-type scheme. He's going to excel, and Chargers were wise enough to do that. And it's paying dividends for them because he's been fantastic for them.
He sure has. All right, let's go outside, Josh, and the guy who's probably been one of the most fantastic defenders, if not rookies, this year, and that's the corner Marcell Lattimore from the New Orleans Saints. He's got a PFF grade of 94.1. Josh, this kid is playing out of his mind right now.
Yeah, he really is. He's been absolutely locked down. We love the quarterback rating stat for corners. When you're a quarterback and you just throw a simple, basic, incomplete pass, just ground in the dirt, you get a quarterback rating of 39.6. Well, Lattimore for the season is allowing a rating of 37.4. So if you're throwing at Lattimore, your chances are what you're doing is worse than just throwing a basic incomplete pass. So that tells you how absolutely dominant he's been as a rookie on a team that has historically had major problems in their secondary. And yet again, Jordan, we're not done with the New Orleans Saints on this list. They got one more.
All right, we're going to – hey, spoiler alert. Or was that a tease? Was that a tease? I think it was a tease.
I think it's both.
Okay, tease spoiler. It's fine, Josh. I created a word earlier. All right, cornerback. The other cornerback is Tre'Davious White from the Buffalo Bills. He's been playing solid all year as well. Again, just getting a little overshadowed here by Lattimore, but White has been really solid, Josh. PFF grade of 87.1. He's been, like I said, been making plays since he got in there.
Yep, allowed a 50% catch rate or lower in all but one game this season. That's, again, as a rookie, that's more than you could ever hope for. And I loved what the Bills did on draft day. They traded way back from their spot, let a team go up and get their quarterback. And, yes, they passed on Lattimore, who's been dominant, but they got the consolation prize in Tre'Davious White. And considering the extra draft picks they got along with White, I would say they did exactly the right thing for them. And it's going to pay dividends for them in the future as long as they're doing good things with those other picks like they did with White.
On the back end, our first safety is Eddie Jackson from the Chicago Bears, playing solid, PFF grade 81.2. Basically, he's been playing since the beginning of the year, but again, starting to heat up now.
Yep, allowed just 37 yards in coverage over the last 6 games, has a pick and a couple of pass breakups in that time period. It's just really been a solid, dependable player for them on the back end. And while so much of the focus is on the Bears and the offensive struggles and having a rookie quarterback, that defense has been really solid. And Jackson has really been one of the solidifying forces on the back end for them.
The other safety, the subject of the professional tease by Josh, it was Marcus Williams for the New Orleans Saints from Utah. It was a player that you and I really liked last year, Josh, especially coming into this process. He was a guy who had a very high football IQ. He was a guy who basically kind of knew where everybody should be and could erase the mistakes of the people in front of him if they made them. And when he wasn't there on the field, you could tell right away. And when he was back, you could tell right away. He was a player that you and I felt could really help a defense, make a pretty quick turnaround. And it looks like that's what's happening.
That's exactly what's happened. And obviously, he's the third Saint on this list, one on offense, two in the secondary for that matter. And I mean, the Saints are legit contenders because of it, because of drafting these three guys. And Marcus Williams is doing exactly what he did at Utah. What was the stat on him last year at Utah? I think he gave up like .09 yards per coverage snap.
It was
something ridiculous like that.
It was disgusting, yeah.
Well, unfortunately he's not quite as good this year. He's only at .21 yards per coverage snap. That's absurd. When you have a team like New Orleans that it's just known for so many years for so many just crazy busts in the secondary, just complete unreliability from every single position back there, to all of a sudden have a lockdown corner and a safety that you can rely on that lets you bring Kenny Vaccaro forward, let him make plays in the box where he belongs as really just an undersized athletic linebacker. That just opens everything up. And I mean, obviously Saints have a lot on offense, but it's the defense that's driving their winning streak right now. That's the big reason why they're in such a great position right now. It's because of that defense and because of guys like Marcus Williams.
Yeah, and shout out to Mickey Loomis and Jeff Ireland and Steve Malin for putting together this awesome Saints draft class. All right, now that we have discussed the rookies and caught everybody up to speed on the best rookies so far this year, we're going to go back to the draft class, Josh. We're going to go digging into some signature stats that are available to our PFF Elite subscribers. We wanted to, we've been doing different ones on ProFootballFocus.com, and this week, Josh, it's yards per route run for the wide receivers. That's always a fun stat. It really kind of shows you who's being productive.
Yeah, it is. It's shows you a lot of big play production, but a lot of efficiency as well. These guys are consistently making big plays and being a big part of the game plan, big part of the offense. And a lot of the usual suspects on this list, Jordan, most of who we would consider the top guys in the country have made this list. So I think it's a very telling stat.
There are some others, that you might not have heard of. But, yeah, I totally agree with you. So we're going to start here at the top. Again, this list can be found at ProFootballFocus.com. If you go to the website, at least the first 5 are there available. If you are a subscriber to PFF Edge and PFF Elite, you can see the complete list there. But we're going to start off at number 1, Josh, at the top. Thomas Owens from Florida International. I'm sure that's what everybody.
That's exactly who I was expecting.
Sure, that's who everybody thought it was going to be. But it is right now. He's got the 4.20 yards per route run, and that's the number 1 spot in the country. Just a really productive guy, Josh.
Yeah, he's been outstanding. His best came against Middle Tennessee State. He had caught 11 of 13 targets, 162 yards in that game and a score. Just a very consistent performer throughout. He's been held under 100 receiving yards in just 3 games this season, and out of 9 so far. So that kind of tells you he's consistently been the guy for FIU.
All right, speaking of consistently being the guy, James Washington, Oklahoma State's coming in at number 2 here. He 4.00 yards per route run. I know he's not the only talented receiver there, Josh, but he's been getting it done for years now. Yeah,
and I believe he's still leading the country in deep yards. So that goes hand in hand with the stat yards per route run, the fact that he's making so many big-time plays downfield. But, I mean, he's going to be a big name come April. I don't know that he's going to get top 10 consideration, but still, when you look at trying to find a guy that can take the top off the defense, that's James Washington. He's going to be that guy this year for sure.
A guy that hasn't really caught on as well nationally as far as people knowing about him, but definitely has a ton of NFL talent, is Michael Gallup from Colorado State. Consistently, basically since the beginning of the year, has been leading a lot of our grading system and categories and things like that. Right now, he's 3.83 yards per route run, ranks at number 3 on this list, Josh. I'm really excited to see where this guy ends up at the next level.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting one. Obviously, we've been super high on him for a long time, and he's delivered. Played well against Alabama as well, so he's got some good film on him against some good schools, and he's that guy more than anyone else that can go get that jump ball. And obviously the NFL, that's a big thing, to be able to just take advantage of one-on-one matchups. That's your guy for this. So I have a feeling he's going to be going a lot higher than maybe mainstream realizes right now.
I totally agree. I think they'll probably catch up to him, a little bit later on, maybe in the spring. All right, moving on down this list, Josh. We have two guys coming in tied at number 4. We have John Ursula, the slot receiver from Hawaii, and we have Paris Campbell from Ohio State. Both these guys coming in with a 3.49 yards per route run, and they're rounding out our top 5 there. Moving on down the list here, we have Cody Thompson from Toledo, who is now injured, won't be playing, and then at number 7 there, Josh. I know you like Keke Coutee.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. He's an explosive guy. 3.28 yards per route run, second highest in the Big 12. Obviously, we already went over James Washington. That's the only one in that conference that does nothing but catch passes and chew up a ton of yards. But no, he's been excellent all year. He's had 3 games this season where he's caught at least 11 passes and had 160 yards and a touchdown. So you want a guy that puts up pure video game numbers. It's Keke, and I think with his explosiveness, and I think he's got a little more versatility than he's probably getting credit for. I think he's going to be an interesting discussion when we talk about NFL with him.
At number 8 here, we have the second of the Oklahoma State wide receivers, Marcell Ateman. This is the big guy, the big target, 3.27 yards per route run. But still, that's so impressive, man, to have your number 2 and number 8 wide receivers in the country as far as yards per route run are both playing for Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be a top 50 draft pick as well. Again, those guys that they can stretch the field vertically, but still can win those 50-50 matchups. I think that's just absolutely huge. And he's 6'4", 220, so he has all that size too. But yeah, he's still a really good athlete. I've liked him for several years. Obviously, he's been around for a while, and he's been very productive for a while, as has James Washington. But I am as big a fan, maybe a bigger fan of the all-around game of Ateman as I am with James Washington, and who's really a guy that just stretches the field vertically.
Currently, there's 2 guys tied at 9th. Chris Platt from Baylor, who's now out for the year, and Will Hastings from Auburn. Both those guys coming in at 3.23 yards per route run, tying them at 9th. But the guy that I really like the most out of this cluster of guys right here, Josh, would probably be Cam Phillips from Virginia Tech, tied for 11th with a 3.16 yards per route run. He's a guy that I know we've been talking about, multiple times, Josh, because he's just been really reliable and really consistent and really productive for Virginia Tech for a while now.
Yeah, the reliability is the big thing with him. 1 drop on 59 catchable targets. That gives him the lowest drop rate in the country among receivers who've had at least 50 catchable balls thrown their way. And he's had a lot of big plays, too. He has gains of 20 or more yards in 6 of his 9 contests so far, 87.8 overall grade. That also ranks 5th among all FBS wide receivers. And again, we've talked about it in past episodes. Not working with an ideal situation at quarterback with a rookie with a freshman that's taken his lumps this year. So I like Cam Phillips a lot, and I think he, again, is going to be a guy that's going to be a big name come April.
All right, so go ahead and go to ProFootballFocus.com and check out the rest of that list. If you haven't already signed up for PFF Edge and Elite, you need to do so now. It's that way you can access all these great articles and all this great data leading us up to the draft. All right, on a previous episode of the show, we had David Newman come on board to talk with us about the 49ers and their potential draft direction. And so, Josh, we thought it'd be great to bring on Ryan Smith, our resident New York Giants expert, to talk about the Giants, because let's face it, Josh, they're not going to the playoffs, right? So we know they got to start turning their attention to the draft. So let's start turning our attention to the Giants draft as well. So thanks, Ryan, for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Should be a good time here.
Ryan, what we want to do is we want to go through with you kind of both sides of the ball and kind of the state of the franchise just in general. Obviously, there's probably some changes coming on a number of levels. And we also kind of want to look at the roster makeup and construction and kind of figure out where the holes are and what needs to be addressed this offseason. First off, let's start just in general with coaching and front office. I mean, we don't want to speculate too much, but it's hard to imagine certainly McAdoo surviving this. And boy, it might be a full change of the guard in the front office as well with Jerry Reese. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of how the season's going. You don't want to speculate too much, but just in terms of everything that's happened with media and especially being in New York, things are obviously, pretty hectic and there's not much football to talk about. So I think even if they do go a different direction with the GM, they're probably going to stay within the organization. I know they haven't had a ton of GMs in the history of the New York Giants. I think maybe 3 in the last 30 years or so. So obviously, if that change were to happen, they'd probably stay pretty close-knit. And then from there, they'd hire a head coach.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me as well. I mean, from Josh and I have talked about it before on here. The Giants have a very talented and well respected personnel department, scouting department, and they have a succession of guys that I think they're ready to sort of move up the ladder. And so it's to the point where some talented guys have had to already sort of leave early to try to go find other options elsewhere. So yeah, we definitely think they'll be just probably promoting from within if they decide to change. Not advocating for that, but again, if that's what happens, then I could see them going that route rather than going the big splashy GM from out of town route. Moving on then, Josh, we covered the that sort of aspect of it. You want to start going down the roster?
Yeah, the first thing I want to go over is Odell Beckham. Obviously, contract's coming up. There are some questions as to what they were going to do regardless. Now he's gotten hurt and he's lost a season. What do you think is going to happen with him?
Well, I think he is a polarizing player. I mean, there are fans that absolutely love him and will defend him to the end. And then recently in the media, there's been a big Odell is the reason for the season being the way it is, which is really interesting because whether you like it or not, I mean, he has a lightning rod. Whatever he does is scrutinized. So I think in terms of on the field, the Giants absolutely need him. They know they need him. He will be the face of the franchise. I think it's inevitable once they re-sign him. It's just how much is it going to cost and when does it get done? Now, the Giants are a very conservative team, especially in contract negotiations. So as it might actually cost them less to lock him up early, but I think it might end up taking longer than normal with some other players just because of his personality and all the things that they need to discuss. So he wasn't at OTAs this year, and there's a lot of things that go into it. So I think it's inevitable that it gets done, but it might take longer than normal.
So now, what about that quarterback position? Because we're getting to the point where that class of the with the Roethlisberger and the Eli Manning, and everyone's going to be trying to identify their QB of the future. So do you see the Giants doing that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I know in your notes from when you guys did the Giants on your yearly review, Mark Ross said that they like to have production from their top 3 picks, and their 3rd round pick was obviously Davis Webb out of Cal. So that brings an interesting dynamic into it.
Right.
Eli is obviously at the end of his career, and the Giants know that. That's public knowledge at this point. So there was actually a report today that Mark Ross had been to UCLA to see Josh Rosen, and I think that out of the quarterbacks, I would probably say that Josh Rosen and Sam Darnold, in my opinion, would be the ones that they would be most likely to go after. I can't see them even having Baker Mayfield on their board just because of his background and the way that they value prospects. If they have a quarterback they're between, they're obviously going to have the higher character guy above. That's just the way the organization is, even if they're going to go chasing production from a better off the field standpoint. So when looking at quarterbacks, they're obviously going to be in the market this year. I know Steve had them taking Sam Darnold in the first PFF mock, and I think that could definitely be a realistic possibility.
I think that'd be a good fit. I mean, we'll get Josh and I'll get more into it further on the show, but yeah, I think that'd be a good fit. Yeah. I also think Rosen would be a good fit too, because I don't think that market would be too big for Rosen. Rosen seems like he would be able to just go to the New York market and handle it, and not every quarterback could.
Ryan, what do you think about Lamar Jackson for them in terms of? I mean, obviously you got the whole New York thing. I think he created a lot of buzz there, but more importantly, in terms of on the field. He's got the arm to get through the weather games there that they're going to have to go through. That's something that Jordan highlighted in the summer would be something that is very critical for them in terms of how they evaluate the position. And obviously he's got all the athleticism too. What are your thoughts on their interest in him?
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting that you brought his name up, because I know that the draft community is pretty split on him at this point. Mm-hmm. Initially, I wouldn't say he'd be a prospect the Giants would go after, just because I keep going back to it. They're very conservative. And just in terms of what they look for in a quarterback, I just think that they would probably look for the standard prototypical quarterback, Eli Manning 2.0. And, that looks more like Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen. So initially,
but they did take Davis Webb in the third round.
That is true. I think it also depends what type of coach they bring in. If they bring in a coach who's very creative play caller and would be able to use Lamar Jackson in a lot of different ways, I think he would definitely be higher up on the board, especially because the head coach does have some input on the draft board. I know you guys touched on. So that is an interesting name that you bring up, and I guess we'll have to see.
Now, what about the offensive line and the group of people that will be protecting this, potential future quarterback?
Right. So going into this offseason, they have Justin Pugh and Weston Richburg, probably their two best offensive linemen, both going to be free agents. And I actually don't see that they can bring both of those guys back. There's a lot of contracts that are going to be impending, and then they also have all those high-priced free agents from the other year still on the books, and those are obviously going to be going up. So in terms of Justin Pugh, he's the 19th overall pick in 2013. He's played tackle and guard, and he's been really, really good when he's a guard, but he's also been an average tackle, which I know Steve talks about it. That's incredibly valuable in the NFL, especially with the New York Giants. If you can have average tackle play, I think that's a win. So that'll definitely play into his contract negotiations, and I would say he is the more likely candidate to be re-signed. And then moving on to Weston Richburg, 43rd overall pick in 2014, played guard his rookie year, which really was a disaster. So he's only a center at this point, and that's his natural position. I think he was a third-ranked center in 2015. So he's shown that production. But the past couple of years, he's battled injuries, and he was put on IR this year. So that's not great for his impending free agency. But I would say Justin Pugh is the guy they're more likely to lock up, especially because of that versatility that they definitely really like.
So do you think that's in particular something else that they'll be looking at in terms of draft and free agent? Is they're going to not just specific positions? I mean, quite frankly, let's assume they do what you suggested, lock Pugh up, let Weston Richburg go. They have one of 5 spots filled up. But versatility is something they're going to be looking at heavily with whoever they end up drafting or picking up in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Eric Flowers, honestly, at this point. I know there aren't a ton of tackles in this free agent class. And then I guess there you'd have to look at the draft. But if quarterback is higher on their board, then that's going to leave them in a tough spot. So I do think that Brett Jones actually could be a cheap replacement at center. He played well this past week. He bullied Tanzel Smart, who's undersized and nose tackle. But anyway, he could be an option at center, so I could see them keeping him there. I know some people in the media think that could be their succession plan there and let Richburg walk. But they're definitely going to be looking at all kinds of offensive linemen, and that's clearly going to be a big need on their draft board.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know.
Okay, lastly, on the offensive side of the ball, let's talk about the running back position. They've gotten some production recently from Orleans Darkwa. Obviously, they've spent draft picks on Wayne Gallman, Paul Perkins, and obviously Perkins got some other issues going on. Do you think they're going to try and roll with that group, or is there potential for them to look elsewhere to try and upgrade and find some more stability at that position?
I think there's always an opportunity to upgrade at running back. I think Shane Vereen is might be the last year of his contract, or I can't see that he's really in the long-term plans. So even if they keep Paul Perkins and Wayne Gallman and give them some touches, they could be in a market for a third down running back as well. A lot of fans are going to want, Saquon Barkley if he's there with the top pick, and he's the sexy pick at a skill position. An exceptional off the field, which I know the Giants will love, but I actually can't see that happening. I think there's a lot of other positions on this team that they would definitely value more heavily than a running back. So I wouldn't say that they're going to be the team that takes Saquon Barkley.
Okay, let's transition and start talking about the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, last year, when they had everyone healthy, they were really at points a very dominant defense, one of the best in the league. Certainly led by the secondary. But when you look at that roster right now, obviously Olivier Vernon's been hurt, and that's been an issue up front. But outside of that, they have a pretty dominant defensive line with Jason Pierre-Paul on the other side, Snacks in the middle, and Dalvin Tomlinson, the rookie from Alabama, who's played extremely well. And Jordan and I are going to talk about him a little bit later. But outside of that, they probably could use a third edge. Certainly something they're finding out now. I don't know what they think about Avery Moss long term, but not that they're going to spend a super high pick on that, but I have to think they're going to look to try and find some depth at edge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely a staple of the Giants drafts. I know you guys have touched on. It doesn't matter if they have a lot of players at edge or on the defensive line in general, but they're always in the market for that. So I could definitely see them looking at some of these edge guys at the top of the draft as well. I think Avery Moss might be in the long-term plans there, but there really isn't a ton of depth. Kerry Wynn is more of a run stopper, but he's never shown anything as a pass rusher. And other than that, there just isn't a ton of depth. And you see that based on how many snaps Olivier Vernon and Jason Pierre-Paul have played. I believe they're both over 95% when they're on when they're both healthy. So that's probably up there with tops in the league. So they could definitely use a lot of depth at edge, and I wouldn't rule out them taking more than one in this draft.
I guess it's probably worth pointing out, too, that when you think of the Giants and them winning their most recent Super Bowls, so much of that stemmed from their ability to get pressure from inside. Right. And that they don't have. Both Tomlinson and Harrison are proven to be excellent run stoppers, but they don't have that pass rusher inside either. So that might be something they need to look at as well. But to me, one of the most interesting things, year in and year out, we say every single time we try and project a draft, Giants need a linebacker. They need linebackers. They need probably 3, 4, 5 of them.
I said about 200 times last year.
Yes, and every year they don't, and then every year that core gets chewed up and spit out for any variety of reasons. Do you think, even though our expectation is that they'll hire from within, so someone who's familiar with the Giant way and has, been there with how they processed in the past, a group that has very much devalued the position, do you anticipate that will remain the same with a new regime, or could that be a direction where they say, you know what, we didn't get a chance to because we didn't have final say, but now we're going to go in a different direction and maybe look to draft someone a little bit higher?
I think with a new head coach, there could be a little influence that way, depending on who he is. But I think within the organization, that's just their philosophy, and especially with those defensive interior players and Tomlinson and Snacks. And I think Tomlinson could be there for a while. He could move right over to one tech when Snacks is up. So with those guys there, I think their philosophy is to stop the run, and they don't need to penetrate. They'll move in different packages on third down. So they don't really care about those linebackers. And I think that's just the organizational philosophy, and I'm not sure that it's really going to change. The one linebacker I could see in long-term plans is Devon Kennard. They've used him a little bit in sub packages, had him do some different things. So I think if there's one name that could be a holdover, it's Devon Kennard.
Now, what about like when you look at the other teams in that division, there's a lot of good tight ends. So what about a coverage linebacker to sort of counteract all those good tight ends?
Yeah, I definitely think that would be hugely valuable. It's amazing how they just don't do it. And even if they did take a linebacker, it would probably be some sort of like edge guy who kind of does all, everything at the same time. He's not really.
That's Calvin Munson. I mean, Calvin Munson at his best at San Diego State was an edge rusher. That's exactly what you're describing.
He has flashed a little bit this year, interestingly. Like when he's on block, he actually can make plays. He just can't shed blocks because he's not big enough. But like I said, there just isn't a lot of depth there, and I'm not sure that they're going to be spending huge resources with other needs on the roster at linebacker.
All right. Do you now the secondary? When you look at that, man, there's a lot of money invested in the secondary. So I can't see them. I mean, you could always use corners, but like I have a hard time seeing them using like any a high draft picks on a corner. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Eli Apple was brought in to replace DRC, and DRC. With everything that's happened this year, I'm not sure he's going to be back next year. I think Jenkins still could be. Jenkins has probably been the Giants' best corner this year. Eli Apple's been very up and down. He'll have those games where he just does not look at the ball, and there's just defensive pass interference, holding, and he gives up a lot of yards. But then he's had a few flashes, like in the Denver game this year, where he looks like top 10, top 15 corner in the league. So you see what the Giants thought when they took him with the 10th overall pick. But in that secondary, Landon Collins is also going to have to get paid. So they're going to be investing more there. I can't see them taking, a top 5, top 10 pick in the secondary, or even investing top couple rounds, especially they've taken Darian Thompson, and Andrew Adams has worked out pretty well. So I don't see them investing a ton in the secondary.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we like to sort of, strategize. So we look and see, let's probably not going to go that way. So then you can try to say, they're probably definitely going to go O-line early, maybe corner late, then it's that sort of thing. But now as a fan of the team, or as a follower that you have been for years, and now that your team is basically not going to make it,
Jordan, can you spell the word fan?
Fan.
How do you spell the word fan?
How? Like, who do you want there? Like, who is it that you, in your heart of hearts, want to see the Giants take?
Well, I think the casual fan would definitely like Saquon Barkley. Fan would like Saquon Barkley there, because, like I said, he's the sexy pick.
Or the Penn State homer.
Hey, well, we're talking Giants here, Josh. We're not talking Penn State. But I think the smart pick would definitely be to take a quarterback, and I think that aligns with the Giants' organizational philosophy. When you are this high, when you have a pick this high in the draft, you have to take a quarterback because it is so important, and you can figure the rest out later. And they did that with Eli Manning, and I think that's what they could end up doing this year in the 2018 draft.
Got 2 rings out of that Eli Manning pick. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, then for your sake, then I hope they end up finding that quarterback that they like at that spot high in the draft. Josh, anything for Ryan on the way out?
No, I appreciate you coming on, man. That's a big help for us to kind of get a look at that picture, and we'll be talking to you, man.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the expertise. So let's look at some of the guys that we touched on it briefly, Josh, but some of the day one potential candidates for the Giants. We have to start at quarterback. And we mentioned 3 guys for sure. That, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, and Lamar Jackson, which we all talked about with Ryan. And going back and looking at the front office's comments about what they liked about Davis Webb, a couple things stood out to us, Josh, and one was, they want someone who can work and lead. They want someone who's football all the time. But one of the things that was really important to them, Josh, was that wintertime arm, as they described it. You're playing out there. They want someone who can be able to still drive the ball, through that wind. And I have to think all 3 of those guys sort of, fit this bill.
Yeah, and that definitely eliminates some other guys that we like as well, like Mike White. as a sleeper guy if they were to maybe think about, well, let's not go at the top of the draft, let's go day 2. Mike White from Western Kentucky, they're not going to consider him. Luke Falk, same deal, out of Washington State, up and down year, but not a big arm guy by any stretch of the imagination. So that's going to disqualify him as well. And quite frankly, it should, because weather should be a priority for them. They're going to have to play in bad weather for a significant portion of the year, and certainly through the playoffs if all things are going well. So they have to prioritize that. And when you have big arm guys that are qualified to be professional quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, like Josh Rosen, that makes a lot of sense.
And I got to say that I think the one that I like the boast. I just combined best and most into boast. You owe me money, Webster's. Anyways,
that's already a word.
The guy I like the boast is Josh Rosen for that spot. I just think that out of all that group, that he's the one that kind of stands out the most to me.
Yeah, and the nice bonus with that, too, is obviously we talked about a little bit with Ryan in terms of this roster just being decimated by injuries. Do they have holes at a number of significant spots? Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, last year, I mean, they were obviously a top 5, top 2 defense when everything was clicking, and they actually have more pieces now than they did the year before. Now, we'll see how that possibly reshapes itself a little bit going forward, possibly DRC not being there, as Ryan said. But still, at the same time, there's a lot of pieces in place there, more so than you typically find with a team that you're expecting at this point to be picking top 2 or 3. So if you're bringing in a rookie quarterback and you got a Josh Rosen there who can take drops from under center, knows how to read defenses, generally speaks the language of the NFL, and has been trained to be an NFL quarterback, not just a college quarterback, that's an added bonus for them as well. That, who knows what they want to do for Eli, but that's potentially a guy that can step in very quickly for him.
So let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Eli, they feel really comfortable with Eli. Eli's, doing well. They decide that they're not going to go quarterback, or, for some reason they don't really like any of the guys that are available to them, and they just, for whatever reason, Josh, quit grilling me, they don't go quarterback with that first, high pick. What's something else they could do?
Well, I think there's a lot of offensive linemen, in particular tackles there. I don't know that you want to go interior. Now, they're potentially replacing – they could be replacing all 3 interior spots. But
they could do that
the
later.
reality is – yeah, exactly. And I think that's something we can touch on in a bit. But tackle – that's a huge, obvious need for them, whether it be right tackle, left tackle. Doesn't matter what they do with Flowers, if they're looking to replace him or if they're going to try and gut it out with him. But they're going to need another tackle, and they're in a position to do so. This is a strong draft at the top. I think there's 3 pretty solid options there. Obviously, we like Williams from Texas, who unfortunately hasn't had the year because he's been hurt, but he's still going to be ready to go by then.
Great player for them.
Fantastic player for them. But then you look at some of the things we talked about in the spring and summer with them in terms of what they value, and I think size is something that's something that they're really going to covet at that position. Certainly they did with Flowers, and while it hasn't worked out, there's some bigger options than Williams there. Kind of go through those couple other guys, Jordan.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Josh, because they have sort of historically, it looks like they like the larger framed athletes there. So, I mean, some of the guys that would be a little bit bigger than Connor Williams, the elite, tackle prospects, I would have to say maybe Orlando Brown from Oklahoma. He would be, what is he, 6'8"? I mean, he's just a, building-sized person. And then Mike McGlinchey from Notre Dame, another building-sized person. So either one of those guys, I would have to say, would be a good fit for them out there in addition to Connor Williams.
Yeah, and I think the expectation is with those two as well is, yes, they're monstrous men, but at the same time, they're not necessarily just right tackle guys. Those guys are expected that they're good enough athletes. They're going to be able to play left tackle at the next level. So again, we talked about versatility being a big selling point for the Giants. I think they're going to get that with those guys, with both of those two. So that really even more so makes those guys legit options that high in the draft for them.
Now, looking at some of the other top names from this draft, as Ryan said, and I think you probably agree, Josh. I mean, Saquon Barkley, I just can't really see that happening. You know what I mean?
No, yeah,
they could, but I mean, I don't know. I don't really see it. So, what about if they decided to go defense? What about a really versatile back end defender and like a Derwin James?
Yeah, that's we didn't really talk about safety with him at all, and they have Landon Collins, but at the same time, they don't have a coverage linebacker at all. They have Landon Collins. That's it. If they were to get a second guy like that like Landon Collins can play basically anywhere in that back seven, can also play at the line of scrimmage, can rush the passer, that's certainly something that they like as well. I just think he brings so much to the table that you have to put him into it. And people listen to this podcast and really people paying attention to the draft in general are probably going to get sick of hearing his name because every single team is in some way going to get connected. But when you are an elite player at so many different things, you're going to be going very, very high in the draft, and he's probably the number one general prospect in this draft outside of the quarterback position. So I think that would be totally legitimate option for them to take in the first round.
Now, that's a bunch of day one, prospects that they can identify, but now kind of like staying with your theme there as far as finding someone in the back seven that could cover. Possibly you do it with a big safety, but they could also probably maybe do that with some sort of like a coverage, linebacker maybe on day two. So, so what do you think, Josh, maybe about like a Roquan Smith from Georgia or like a Sky Moore from South Carolina or Stacey Thomas from Louisville?
Yeah, Roquan Smith, Stacey Thomas, those two guys in particular, versatile guys, I think can rush the passer as well. I think, again, they're going to covet that versatility. Whether their presumed new regime is going to be willing to address linebacker that high, that remains to be seen. But if they were, I just think those are two obvious guys. Stacey Thomas in particular, who's had some injury issues this year, unfortunately. But I think that makes a lot of sense for them with everything that those two guys bring to the table.
All right, we'll go back to offense because Ryan had sort of agreed with our assessment that the interior offensive line was probably going to be an area of need. Mm-hmm. If they decide that they want to stick with Weston Richburg at center, they're going to need possibly a guard. If they decide that they're necessarily going to keep Richburg, then they could possibly use somebody who could play guard and center. So, Josh, give me somebody who could play guard and center that would be a day two pick for them.
Yeah, it's a guy we talked about for the 49ers potentially a couple of weeks ago, and that's Billy Price from Ohio State.
Old Billy Price.
I just think he would be a really, really smart pick. Again, we don't need, for anyone that listens to us religiously, thank you.
You're welcome.
But we don't need to say too much about Billy Price because we talk about him quite a bit. But he's a guy that, again, played guard, played very, very well for first several years of his Ohio State career. Transitioned this year to center with Pat Elflein going to the Vikings, and quite frankly, he's been a significantly better center this year than Pat Elflein ever was at Ohio State. So I think you're getting a premium prospect there that can play a number of positions regardless of what happens with Weston Richburg and company there at the Giants. So he makes a lot of sense. And I really like the idea of potentially double dipping as well. I'm a nice guy, so I'll give you credit. This was something that you discussed when we were prepping for this podcast in terms of continuity being as important as talent on the offensive line. Well, what if you have the chance to do both? And by me saying that, I mean you're getting potentially a top three offensive tackle. With the top three pick is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. With a McGlinchey or a Williams or Brown, and then going right back and then getting a big time center or guard prospect like a Billy Price as well. So that way you've got two young guys coming in that are able to grow up together, to gel. You don't have other guys, older, younger, coming in at the same time. You got at least two guys coming into this line together that have time to build that rapport that is always needed on the offensive line. And I think that would be a really smart way to do it.
I think that's a really good idea, honestly. And then, like, if let's just say that they decided that they wanted just an earth-moving guard to pair with one of those tackles, or to pair with, Billy Price. Give me some massive earth-moving type guards, Josh.
Yeah, well, Cody O'Connell from Washington State would be an option. The continent, that's his name. That's pretty much earth-moving, right? Now, I do want to say this with a caveat that I think Ryan's point about them needing versatility is very important. So I'm not sure you're going to get that with O'Connell. I think he's pretty much plugged into his guard spot. I think you could potentially get a little bit more, though, with UTEP's Will Hernandez. I think he probably can play either guard spot a little better than O'Connell can. And I don't know about him in center. That's just something we haven't seen, but it doesn't mean it's not something he can do. But I think you're getting a better athlete than O'Connell, and he's just his production and every single facet the last 3 years is just completely off the charts. And it doesn't matter who he's played, even if it's in his conference, if he's playing Texas, etc. He's dominated his competition, and I just think he would be an excellent pick for them.
Agreed. There you have it, Giants fans. We have gone down the list here with Ryan Smith and identified areas for you to possibly address in the draft. And then Josh and I have gone back over and identified specific prospects for you guys to keep an eye on as we move forward here. And don't worry, help is coming, Giants fans, in the form of the draft, as Josh and I know. All right, that'll do it for us this week. Josh, anything you want to say on the way out?
No, I'm sick of you. Let's leave.
He's still sick of me. Bye, everybody.